Hello there, welcome back to Backyard Ballistics. Sorry for the wait, but I'm moving to a larger shop and getting some upgraded licensing, so thank you for the patience. Anyway, today I'm doing something I've never done on this channel yet, and that is shotguns. Here I've got not one, but two highly historical Winchester model 1897 pump-action shotguns, a model considered to be the first successful pump-action gun in history. They come from different sources and are in different conditions. One is a 12 gauge, the other one is 16 gauge. They're both well beaten up, and I'm quite sure they're even worse than they look. The rustier one is the 16, and it actually came without a pump. I was able to get the other one on it before starting to film so I could take better pictures. Everything else is just how I got them. You'll see me switching from one gun to the other during the video in the same order as I'll be working on them. The first signs of trouble are already visible. Some well-defined areas are not rusty, and it looks like they've been patched with soft solder. Also, I can tell these guns are extremely old. The marking on the slide says Winchester model 1897, which is the very first style they did. The model 1897 shotgun has been an extremely popular one. It remained in production for 60 years until 1957, but these two examples are very early models. The first giveaway is the old style frame, but the serial numbers are the most accurate way of dating these, and from them I can tell they were both certainly made before 1904, making them at least 120 years old. The 12 gauge is apparently in better condition, but I have the suspect somebody messed up here as well. The rudimentary carving of the stock is somewhat of a giveaway. Looks like some tribal African art piece. Also, I've never seen that bright sheen on the trigger guard and bolt carrier on a Model 97, and I'm worried it might have been nickel plated. I know that carving is a form of art, and that you're not supposed to judge art, but I can't help wondering what kind of maniac did that stock. We'll call him maniac number 1, number 2 being the one that plastered the 16 gauge with soft solder. The more I looked at these shotguns, the more I saw things that went right, and at this part of the project I always tend to panic a bit. As I was saying, I'd actually placed the pump there myself since the gun didn't come with any. That bright ring is aluminum and is certainly a foreign part. Aluminum was very expensive and uncommon until the 1920s, so somebody definitely messed up with this gun after then. Another rather uncommon thing we find on the 12 gauge is that the mechanics are totally stuck, even though there doesn't appear to be nearly enough rust to do that. I actually had to check the gun was unloaded using a cleaning rod. Anyway, both shotguns are of the takedown type, a clever design that allowed easily taking the barrel on and off the frame, so it could be carried in a much shorter package. That shiny rod is what transfers the force from the pump to the bolt of the gun. It's not supposed to be that shiny, and it's certainly not supposed to be wibbly wobbly, timey wimey. And for that matter, the magazine band shouldn't be sliding down the barrel before removing the screw. At this point I was slowly drifting from panic to desperate, and I was seriously considering scrapping the whole project. But I was too curious to find out what I would find inside it. Wood, apparently. Somebody must have wanted to reduce the magazine capacity for hunting reasons. Since everything looked stark and rust wasn't nearly enough to explain that, I thought it may have been some kind of dried up grease and used some mineral solvent to dissolve it. Carlo from the past didn't know this was going to be the most useless move in the whole Backyard Ballistics channel history, but let's let him believe for now and instead move back to the 16 gauge. On it, the situation was a little bit more stuck, but I managed to take it down anyway. The barrel is connected to the action through the use of interrupted threads that release it after a quarter of a turn. Or at least it's supposed to release it, usually without the need for a hammer. I realized that it was time for the de-rusting bath. This time I'm using a new, highly effective and gentle mixture of my own design that I'll soon disclose in detail on my second channel. It is as quick as Evaporust at a fraction of the cost, and doesn't harm healthy metal. During the wait, I started looking for spares as I was most likely going to need some. Except geographic limitations won't even let me see the pictures. I know they're not shipping out the US, but let me at least see the pictures so I know what I'm looking for. This is getting more and more widespread together with a stricter, intrusive control of online activities, but luckily there's an easy fix to that, which is Surfshark VPN. Not only a necessary tool in my job, but also today's video sponsor. A VPN manages your internet traffic in place of your internet provider, so you connect to the VPN and the VPN then connects to the internet. This provides a list of benefits. Normally providers see and often record the websites you visit, and I don't like anybody sticking their nose in my stuff. Using a VPN, your provider will only be transferring encrypted data to and from the VPN. They won't have a clue which website you're visiting, and the website won't have a clue who you are. Surfshark servers are designed to be incapable of keeping logs, and they're dotted in every possible country, allowing you access to every single bit of information on the internet, no matter if your government tries censoring it. You also easily avoid all those annoying geographic limitations, as you can see here for our gun spares, but that also includes streaming services and e-commerce platforms. They now also provide integrated antivirus, search engine, and data breach alert service. Secure your privacy with Surfshark. Enter coupon code BackyardBallistics for an extra 4 months free at surfshark.deals/backyardballistics. Back to our no longer rusty shotgun. Notice how my new derusting bath doesn't flash rust the parts when you take them out of it. Now that the rust is gone, we can also give a look at the bores, a crucial part of any gun. If the bore is not good enough, there's not much worth doing. So I'm giving both barrels a good brushing, wiping and inspection. The 12 gauge is a bit rough, but nothing out of the ordinary for a gun that's over a century old. That's good enough to shoot. The 16 is not. Shotgun barrels are usually much thinner walled than rifle barrels, and this means that the same pit or crater takes up a larger percentage of the wall of a shotgun barrel compared to a rifle one. I'm not gonna risk it with this one. This barrel is done. Let's move on for now and look at the 12 gauge. We left the frame soaking solvent for a few hours, which as anticipated was completely useless. The gunk did not come off. I didn't give much thought to it and went ahead with the disassembly anyway. It's interesting to look at the differences between the two frames I've got. They're otherwise identical, but they all seem to have some foreign parts. The guide stop screw has been replaced in both cases with improper ones. The ejector group is apparently absent on the 16 gauge, where the holes have been patched with soft solder. On the 12 gauge, it looks nothing like it's supposed to, but at least there's something there. The makeshift screw on the 16 was easy enough to remove, as was the rest of the disassembly. On the 12, on the other hand, the head of the screw is already stripped and it was really stuck in there. Sometimes I just wish I could weld onto small bits without ruining the surrounding material. How handy would it be if I could just rebuild the head of this screw in place so I can undo it properly without having to drill it out and most likely then having to rethread the hole to a larger size? Very handy, and in fact, that's exactly what I did, thanks to some incredible equipment that I only just acquired, and is the reason I resurrected this project that had been sitting around my shop for months waiting for some extreme repairs. I'll tell you more about it in a minute. Now the only thing left to do is removing the carrier pin, and we can finally take this thing apart. In the meanwhile, the action bar had split in two, and I realized that it had actually come apart before and had been patched up with some soft solder by maniac number 1. Anyway, these two parts, the breech bolt and bolt carrier, are at the heart of the Model 97 functioning, designed by John Moses Browning himself, improving over earlier pump repeaters, with his design then being bought by Winchester. Practically the whole reloading action is performed by this rather complicated block, the carrier. It contains the sear with its spring, the cartridge guide plate, the hammer and its mainspring, as well as Browning's main improvement over previous pump action designs, the slide lock bar, a critical safety feature I'll explain in a bit. The thing is, I first need to take it out. The valve pivots around a pin, which is kept in place by a set screw, which is totally stuck, and I think I know why. As I feared, Maniac number 1, that we already know had questionable taste from his tribal wood carving, not only thought nickel plating some parts of the shotgun would improve the look of it, but he did it without taking them apart completely. So now that screw is in one piece with the carrier. You can easily see what I mean by comparing it with a 16 gauge one. I ended up having to grind some material off around the head so I could free it. That looks terrible now, but I promise with my new machine I'll be able to weld that down and you'll hardly even know it was there. And I forgot to give you the bad news. The 16 gauge carrier is wrecked. This left section broke away and is missing. But now you'll say at least the 12 gauge has got all it needs. No, it doesn't. The bolt is wrecked. Since Maniac number 1 apparently couldn't find spare extractors for it, he instead decided to mill out 2 large slots in the most stressed part of the bolt to accommodate some foreign extractors from God only knows what other gun. Using a bolt in this condition is asking for trouble. I kept going ahead with the disassembly even though at this point I was really unsure how to get this gun sorted. It's not easy to find a spare bolt, not only because it's a model discontinued in 1957, almost 70 years ago, but also because the bolt is a registered part in Europe, so there's paperwork and lengthy procedures involved in getting one from abroad. However, a stroke of luck came when I least expected it and from where I least expected it, Maniac number 2. Until now, we'd only known him for his belief that any mechanical problem can be fixed by patching it up with soft solder, but he also must have been a bit of a bungler because he installed a 12 gauge bolt in a 16 gauge gun. These 2 bolt heads are exactly the same size and they only fit 12 gauge ammunition. The 16 gauge shell is way too small and extractors wouldn't even reach it. This means that in theory I might be able to swap the bolts and make one functioning shotgun out of the 2. That didn't sound too bad, we should end up with at least one that goes bang. So I laid all the main parts on the bench and I'm marking the ones I'm not using. The shotgun on top, that is the 12 gauge, is going to be rebuilt using the bolt, slide, and I'm not sure about the trigger guard from the 16 gauge, plus a few small bits, including the ejector pin that was missing on the 12 gauge frame, where it appears to have been replaced by a makeshift ejector that I'll definitely get rid of. So I melted and blew away the solder to expose the holes of the ejector group. The ejector pin is located in the rearmost one and is this T-shaped part that is responsible for ejecting the spent shell. However, in doing that it is helped by a specially designed leaf spring that was notorious for breaking and that not surprisingly is missing on both the guns I have, so I'll have to rebuild it from scratch. Before I can do that, however, I want to finally get rid of that gummy residue that all these parts are still caked in. The fact that mineral solvent didn't dissolve it suggests this is not dried up grease as I previously thought, but polymerized oil. This can happen with lubricating oils obtained from vegetable sources, as was common in the early 1900s. Unsaturated fatty acids contained in those oils tend over time to react with oxygen, polymerizing into a solid mass that is no longer susceptible to common solvents. If my reasoning is right, exposure to a 10% sodium hydroxide solution will quickly destroy the stuff through a process called hydrolysis. And it seems I was right. Look how the gunk is coming off. Next problem, what do I do with this awful nickel job? I certainly can't leave it there. It's not only that it doesn't look right, but it was poorly done and is peeling off in some areas, so I have no other option than removing it, but how? You can of course polish it off with abrasives, but on complicated parts like these ones, that'll take forever, and I'm most certainly going to leave some behind in corners and hard to reach spots, and because of that, they won't take the bluing. I'll need to act electrochemically. At the end of the day, that's the same way nickel was originally applied. However, I can't simply reverse the polarity to get the nickel off. The trouble is, if you do that, as soon as some steel is exposed, it's going to get attacked even more vigorously than the remaining nickel because thermodynamics. To minimize steel corrosion, I'll have to use a process specifically devised for stripping nickel from steel. The one I'm using is based on a nasty solution mostly composed of sulfuric acid, a bit of water, copper sulfate and glycerin. I don't really know what the glycerin is for, but my understanding is the copper sulfate is what prevents the steel from being corroded. The parts to be stripped are connected to the positive terminal of a 6V constant voltage power supply, so the part is acting as anode, while a strip of lead is used as a cathode. As soon as the part is submerged, the circuit is closed and a substantial amount of current starts running through the concentrated electrolyte. This quickly dissolves the nickel. Inevitably, some areas are stripped quicker than others, exposing bare steel, but that's where I think the copper sulfate comes at play. It immediately tries to false plate copper on top of the steel, and this deposition competes with the stripping action, effectively preventing loss of iron. The process is quite quick, in my case about a minute and a half was enough. On the larger parts, I had to do 1/2 at a time, since I didn't want to use too large amounts of sulfuric acid in the shop. Now for the hard part, headspace. See, back in the day, parts were not really perfectly interchangeable, and each breech group needed to be adjusted to fit each barrel. This bolt comes from a totally different gun, and it wasn't even right for that gun, so I have no idea where it actually comes from. Therefore, I've got very little chances of the headspace being right straight away, and I'm expecting this bolt to be either too short for the gun or too long. It came out to be too long. When I try to chamber a shell, the bolt won't be able to close, meaning the headspace is too short. In other words, there is not enough space from the bolt face to the chamber ring to accommodate the rim of the cartridge. Notice how instead the bolt that came with the gun, the messed up one, closes fine. Now bear with me. Normally in this situation you act on the barrel, or in this case the chamber ring because it's a takedown. This means I'd remount the entrance of the barrel so the cartridge can go a little bit further and gain the space it needs. That's what you do 90% of the times, but it's not what I'm gonna do here. And the reason is that even if I managed to make the cartridge fit, the extractors wouldn't, they're too long. So I'd need to make more room for them as well, and there's just not enough meat in that ring for me to do that. Also, the face on this bolt is really messed up and it could really do with some resurfacing. Long story short, I'm facing off the bolt, grinding the bolt face down by about 1/2 millimeter. Then I'll need to shorten the extractors so they'll fit the new bolt length and the chamber cutouts. You can clearly see they're too long here, the shell shouldn't be able to move that much. Now, while you've probably heard somebody talking about lengthening headspace before, I'm quite sure you've never heard about shortening an extractor. That's because there's no conventional way of doing it. See, to shorten this gap, I need this surface on the extractor to move backwards, but the only way of doing that is by adding material, while you can only subtract it from an existing part. That was until a few weeks ago when I got this machine, a specially designed micro-pole stick welder. In conventional practice, if you have a metal part that needs a repair, you can take material off of it, sometimes you can move it around a bit, but never add more material to it. What the micro arc welder is allowing me to do here is exactly that, adding new steel to an already existing steel part without ruining it. The way this works is with a variation on the tungsten inner gas welding technique, then instead of using the continuous arc customary of TIG welding, uses much higher power densities but impulses only lasting a few milliseconds. This extremely quick heating means that there's no time for heat to flow far away from the molten weld pool, which together with the small electrode size translates into a heat affected zone that is only a few microns thick. This means you can weld on heat treated parts without harming the heat treatment below and around the area you're welding. It also means minimal distortion. The machine is made by a company called Lampert in Germany and is used for all sorts of extreme repairs from jewelry to dental and anywhere the heat associated with conventional welding is unacceptable. But the guy who pioneered its use on firearms is actually a young English gunsmith named Adam Morris that discovered its potential in repairing and restoring high-end firearms. I had the privilege of meeting him in person and I want to thank him for sharing his experience with me and pointing me in the right direction with the machine. And this is really invaluable for what I do. As anticipated, it allowed me to add material to the extractors so that I could regrind them at a shorter length to fit the now shorter bolt. To do this, I used a hard overlay filler wire of just 200 microns thick to rebuild a thin and long part made of high carbon steel. There is no conventional welder that you could even think of using to do that. It's also the tool I used for quickly rebuilding the head of that stripped screw at the beginning of the video. Also, do you remember that mess I made to get out the screw that Maniac number 1 had gotten stuck in the carrier? I used the welder to fill in the missing material, just went a little higher than the original surface, filed it down, and now you can hardly see there was a damage at all. I know there's a little bit of undercut, but I am content with that considering I've only had this thing for a few weeks. You see these two quite frequently in upcoming videos, as it's also great at filling up rust pits. Small or large corroded areas can be filled with the appropriate filler wire, basically replacing the metal that was lost to corrosion. I go into much more detail in upcoming videos. For now, I want to get this thing to shoot again. While I was welding, I'd placed all the parts in my new de-rusting solution to get rid of leftover rust, mostly from the frame that until now had just been degreased. This of course also removed what was left of the original bluing. The only thing I'm missing now is the ejector spring. It's not strictly necessary, and the very earliest 97s that came out of the factory didn't even have it, but it makes ejection more reliable by kicking out the spent shell. A spare one of these in Europe is about as rare as hen's teeth, and I have no other option than rebuilding one from scratch. By now I was no longer panicked or desperate, but more like exhausted, so I played it a bit by ear. I cut out a small section of 1% carbon spring steel ribbon and heated it up to soften it. I don't need to go for a proper anneal, a high temper will make it workable enough. Then I drilled the hole for the screw and started shaping the spring on a small belt sander I have. Once I got it to fit in the hole, I used some high-end equipment to bend it by slightly more than 90 degrees. That'll do. If I just installed it as it is though, it would just bend back at the first shot, so I have to reheat treat it for it to regain its springiness. This time I'm heating it above its austenite transition temperature and then immediately quenching it in oil. This transformed the austenite structure into martensite, in other words, as hard as it gets. Unfortunately, it's also brittle like glass. Heating to 250 degrees C in a bath of molten salts will trade a little bit of that hardness for a great deal of toughness. Now a little trim and we should be good to go. I realised that while playing it by ear, I made it a lot chubbier than the original one, so I have the feeling in 100 years from now somebody will call me a maniac. But that's okay. Actually, giving a closer look at the bolt, I think I have a better explanation for the mess that Maniac number 1 did with the extractors. This thing is full of cracks. The knowledge of metal fatigue and fracture mechanics back when this gun was designed in the late 1800s was rudimentary. Extremely thin metallic sections were combined with sharp corners and the impurity-rich steel used at the time, making up an ideal breeding grounds for fatigue cracks. Luckily these only happen on minor areas and the pressure-bearing parts are still solid. However, I'd still want to stop that crack from growing, and that's another instance for putting the micro arc welder to work. Now we're ready for bluing, which means I'm gonna have to take all these sub-assemblies apart again, 81 parts in total, blue everything and then put it back together. Right, let's go with a, hopefully, final reassembly. The first thing I'm doing is adjusting the takedown mechanism. By locking the sleeve in the proper position, you can get the barrel tight enough to stay firmly in place, but not too tight so you won't be able to screw it in. Then it's time for the receiver. A bit rough, but not too bad. With the mechanics mostly reassembled, let's look at the wood. Since I want this gun to sit in a firearm museum and not a tribal art gallery, I'll use the stock that came with the 16 gauge. I just gave it a little scrub and a couple coats of true oil. And this is the result. I know I kind of cheated since I started with 2 guns and only ended up with 1, but I hope I was able to express the hassle I had to go through to even get this one to work safely. Actually, does it even work? Since apparently I didn't think there were enough things that could go wrong in test firing a Frankenstein 120-year-old shotgun with dozens of potentially mismatched moving parts, I decided to make it worse by reloading some buckshot shells with vintage components including 60-year-old paper holes, obsolete primers and some very early smokeless powder from the early 1900s. What could possibly go wrong, right? Well, the primers did. Not all of them, but after a couple of duds, I gave up and went to some more recent ammunition. Modern hull and primer, but I still use some 60-year-old powder. And the gun worked fine with these. It would certainly benefit from some minor tweaking, but you know what? Not bad for a greenhorn. Hope you liked the video. Once again, a huge thanks goes to my patrons, which as usual are all listed here. Thank you all for watching, subscribe if you'd like to see more, and I'll see you next time. Bye.